Ethic Cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace is going to help fix our world, I got a real treat for you today. We're doing a little switcheroo on you, a little surprise Ethico or Ethicsverse MBA session. So you guys have been loving this session. If you have not come to these, this is going to be a little treat for you to see what is going on and what everybody is talking about. I got a couple announcements to run through, so drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. We always say this every week, and I'm going to keep saying it until I die, that your network is your net worth. You have to take advantage of this collegial community that we're all a part of and that we're all building in real time here, and expand your network, because neither of those things, your network or your net worth, are as big as we'd like them to be. Also, if you can drop in where you're coming from today, I always love to see where everybody is from around the world. This Ethico or this Ethicsverse MBA session is really, this course that we started. It's a 6-session course. I'll talk about some more in a second here, but it's really about helping us to better speak the language of business. It is one of the greatest compliments you could ever get when your CEO says to you, I don't really think of you as a compliance person. I think of you as a business person. That means that you're wearing the right jersey and you're showing up like the right teammate to the rest of the business to really add that enterprise value. These comments are rolling in. I'm still riding on a little bit of a high from Ethicsverse Day. All those replays, if you missed it, all those replays are up on our YouTube channel. Quick round of applause for Chase, the one and only Chase, the man behind the scenes. All of those videos, all that content that Ethico puts out is on the YouTube channel. So if you ever miss an episode, you can go ahead and catch those there. And Ethico is not the only person or the only group that's putting out thought leadership in our space. If you're not feeding your mind, you're stagnating. And there are so many great podcasts out there. We love to feature those various different podcasts. Two Gurus Talk Compliance, of course, the Great Women in Compliance podcast. So many great podcasts out there and more being added all the time. So definitely should sample those, and obviously check out the Ethics Experts as well, where I dive deep with practitioners to hear their story and their philosophy. If you're here for credits for HRCI or for SHRM or the Compliance Certification Board, this is the place to be. You can triple dip if you want. And because I'm still riding on such a high from the Ethicsverse Day that broke all the records, round of applause to all of you who attended, 75,000 emoji reactions, if you can believe it. 4,900 people attended. This was officially now the largest ethics and compliance event in the world, and the feedback we've gotten has been phenomenal. Really 4 phenomenal sessions. I left the day feeling absolutely energized, even though I was kind of on camera all day. So that should tell you something. If you've not downloaded our benchmark report, definitely should do that. If you have downloaded it, you should download it again, okay? There's so many great insights in here, so definitely check that out, laminate that, leave that on your coffee table, it's a great conversation starter as well. And we are going to be talking about, this is unplanned in a way, but we're talking about the engine behind your brand in our session, our Ethicsverse MBA session. And we've recently launched Third Party Plus. So we launched Policy Plus a couple of months ago. We've now launched Third Party Plus. And what we've found is that there's a ton of risk, a ton of manual work in this third-party process, this third-party due diligence process, the third-party monitoring process. And it's really done with a patchwork of different tools, different processes, different approvals in place. And it's really hard for you to have that real bird's eye view of all of your third parties, or if an auditor comes in for your SOC 2 or something like that, having that kind of full visibility of this network of third parties that contribute to your organization's, value provision, like the value that your organization provides to the marketplace. So Third Party Plus is really all about increasing the efficiency and the effectiveness, really the effectiveness more than anything, of your third party program. We leverage AI in some smart ways to map your process and really leverage AI to cut out a lot of the manual work so that AI can do a lot of this diligence work and present it to your team, and your team can make the decision. So as belts are getting tightened, as there is, pressure across all the businesses in our economy, there's a lot of pressure that disproportionately is falling on the compliance team. It doesn't mean that pressure accounts for the fact that you still have a job to do. And there is a lot of value in our department spending more of our time doing the unique things that only we can do, bringing that risk lens from a compliance perspective to the decisions that the business needs to make. And this is a great platform to do that. So if you're interested in this, check out our website, drop a 1 in the chat if you want, or reach out to us directly, and we will give you a little overview of this really cool new platform. Ethicsverse Day 2026 was a totally phenomenal event. Like I said, tons of great feedback. If you missed any of those episodes, I'm going to say it one more time. Check it out on YouTube, or if you're an Ethicsverse subscriber, which everybody should be at this point. What the heck's wrong with you if you're not? They're also available on the console. All right. as we get into this, I want you to be thinking about, I'm not putting you on the spot here, but I want you to be thinking about, we have 2 more sessions left. We have today's Ethicsverse MBA session, and then we have one more called Run It Like You Own It. And what I would like to get some feedback on, if you guys like these kind of business-minded sessions, we have some ideas on our side on what some additional quote-unquote courses could be, but I'd love to hear from you on what other areas should we kind of dive deeper on. This initial Ethicsverse MBA has really all been about kind of going high level across these various different components of a business so that you can kind of speak the language a little bit better and kind of understand some of the understand how these different sort of functions connect so you can, show up like more of a business person. Thank you, Kayla, giving me a little energy. Kayla loves my sessions. Okay, phenomenal. So today's session is really all about the machine behind the brand. Okay, so we're going to be talking about operations, supply chain, the technology, the things that, the things in the business that you don't see on a day-to-day basis unless you're kind of looking for them. Professor Nick is back, baby. So this is what we've done so far. So we first talked about just kind of understanding at a high level the business that you're in. Our second session, and again, these should all be saved and liked and subscribed, okay? Like drop a comment in the chat type of thing, okay? The second session was all about financial language of the business. We talked a lot about finance, these financial concepts that are, embedded in the minds of the CFO. And then we talked about, in session 3, connecting compliance to business strategy. When we can do our board reporting or present to leadership and constantly have this sort of forward pressure of connecting the things that we're doing to the business's strategy, the business's objectives, it really helps to better frame our department, not as a cost center, a barnacle on the ship, but as something that is really integral to the long-term success of the organization. The last session, we talked about the revenue engine. We were talking about sales and marketing and all the various different components, like how that sort of revenue engine works and what sort of risks can kind of come out of that. And today we're talking about engaging with operations in tech and technology. Next week, our next session is going to be about influence, culture, business metrics, things like that, really kind of running it like you own it. So we're going to bring it all together there. But please do drop in the chat the various different areas. I mean, we could have a whole session on finance. We could have a whole session on marketing. There's a lot. There's a lot to learn. From an MBA perspective. Okay, so I want to get started with this kind of a question. How many suppliers does your company have? How many third parties do you have? How many of their suppliers can you name? That second number is really your supply chain visibility, and that's where a lot of risk lives. And what we found is that most compliance programs are built around the front office. It's built around that sort of surface level thing, but the majority of our business risk really lives in the back office. So like I said, we're going to be diving into operations, supply chain, technology, infrastructure, and data. Compliance, you're going to hear this throughout the session. We really do have a unique department in most organizations. We're one of the few departments, maybe the only departments, that really are this sort of connective tissue or this, circulatory system that touches every single different function. The rate of nodes in our network should be a lot higher than support or implementation or operations or whatever, because the things that we do end up touching the stakeholders across these various different departments. And so when we can start to think about that opportunity or think about that sort of potential characteristic as an opportunity, we can many times reassess what we're doing, kind of the plan that we're making or the bets that we're making with our time to ultimately, achieve the main goal, which is adding more value to the business, helping to, increase that enterprise value. So let's talk about, we talked about how do we account for things. We talked about how do we sell things. Today, we're going to talk about how do we actually make and deliver things. And so there are examples throughout this. This is kind of taking a bit of a manufacturing approach because there's a certain tangibility to, that. It was a lot easier to kind of illustrate some of these concepts universally from kind of this manufacturing perspective. But if you're in healthcare or you're in a services business, the same concepts apply. And so I want you to be looking for those kind of corollaries. And as we're going through these, please do, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. It's hard for me to juggle both, but Joa is going to go ahead and pull those out. Joa is the other brains behind this whole operation. And if you love the Ethicsverse and you want to support, let's get a massive emoji explosion for Joa because he is Johnny on the spot, Joey on the spot. Joa, I'll work on that one. Okay, so here is the physical reality behind your brand, okay? We have manufacturing, we have service delivery, we have logistics, right? That's moving things from A to B. We have quality control, making sure that whatever's being delivered, whether that's a service or that's an actual product, is meeting our standards. We have procurement, that's buying all those inputs, right? And again, depending on your organization size, there might be whole teams dedicated to each one of these bullets. If it's at a smaller organization, there might be one person that handles multiple pieces of these. So there's a lot of trade-offs, of course, in a business, or handoffs, I should say. And then finally, facilities, infrastructure. So these are kind of the physical reality behind all of our companies and all of our brands. And I think the reason that compliance officers need to understand this is that most employees work doing some things. They're not just working in an office. In most cases, in most industries, right? In a big manufacturing company, the majority of those employees are maybe on the shop room floor. In a big hospital system, the majority of the employees are, in the hospitals delivering that kind of service. Operational shortcuts always are going to create some kind of risks. Those could be safety risks. Those can be quality risks. Ultimately, those are brand risks, and those are bottom line risks at the end of the day if those things go left. And the fact is, every single department in your organization has a series of OKRs or goals or objectives that they need to meet. They likely have leaders that have their own pressures on them. So all that stuff kind of trickles downhill, and the odds of somebody not following, every procedure and every process, to the letter is obviously high. That's why we have jobs in many ways, right? Regulatory violations don't happen on they happen on the floor, not in the boardroom. So it's not the board, it's not the board who's doing, money laundering, right? It's not the board who's doing the bribes. The bribes are being done by the salespeople that are in the other country trying to meet their quota. And then environmental compliance is almost entirely operational. I use, in my previous life, I did a lot of I did a lot of work in the manufacturing space, and this was always a concern. This sort of environmental thing, whether we were buying a plant or we were setting a new one up. So again, all these things, all these risks kind of live out in the business. They don't really exist in the four corners of our office. So if your compliance program is really set up to cover just people in suits, people that are working in offices, you're probably missing 80% of the risk. And again, given where we're at in the maturity of our industry, given where we're at in the economic life cycle that we're in, our job is not just to kind of put one foot in front of the other. Our job is to constantly, on every new round of betting, pick our heads up and make better bets with our time, okay? I love these poker analogies because I use them all the time, but that's really what life is. It's not like before you start a poker tournament, you say, I'm going to bet this on this hand and this on this hand, and I'm going to bet this at this round. No, you're constantly reassessing how much, what your stack of chips is, that's your kind of resources, and the odds of, you winning given the new information you have. And so there's a lot of freedom in that. There's a lot of freedom in understanding that your value is not in your plan, it's in your ability to plan. Your value is not in having all the answers, but rather knowing that you can figure it out as you go, as the circumstances change. That's what the best poker players are able to do, and that's really what the best compliance officers are able to do. So bringing those kind of fresh eyes to kind of relook at this business that maybe you've been in for several years, or reconsidering the program that you have going and knowing that you have full license to solve for outcome in your world, that gives you a lot of freedom to reconfigure things or make, again, different bets with your time. So let's dive into supply chain complexity, because this is where a lot of risks that we can't see actually live. So let's think about supply chain tiers. As we have started to, as we've rolled out Third Party Plus, and we've had a bunch of people come through beta, thanks for all of you who participated. You really helped to push this product forward. We started to see some similarities, and we started to understand at a more kind of day-to-day level across these various different businesses and industries and, different size companies, that so much of our risk really lives in our supply chain. And if you remember during COVID, it really kind of laid bare the fragility of our kind of modern day supply chain. It's very different than what it was like in the 1920s or the 1950s or something like that. We have very international businesses. Most large companies have some kind of international component. They're getting supplies in, they're selling things across borders, and a lot of risk for the business, not just from a compliance perspective, but just from a business and operations perspective, lives in your supply chain. So let's kind of talk about supply chain tiers. So tier one is kind of your direct suppliers. These are the people you know. The tier two are your suppliers. During this sort of kickoff last year of all of this tariff, horse trading, whatever you want to call it. This vulnerability was really kind of brought to the surface in a lot of organizations. And then your tier three is your kind of deep supply chain, these are the people you have no idea about that don't even exist. So our visibility drops exponentially. This is not like a linear drop of our visibility. It really kind of falls off of a cliff. Really, when you get to tier 2, if you don't have a really strong third-party program in place or a really strong, a real clear visibility into your suppliers or onward. So we estimate that about 60% of your supply chain risk actually lives beyond that sort of first tier of the suppliers that are directly selling you those things, those tier 2 and tier 3. So that's a lot of risk that can kind of set off a chain reaction or knock down a lot of dominoes. And depending on your business and the extent to which you have critical components, perhaps that are coming from suppliers, having some visibility into that is critical. So what are some of the challenges that compliance faces with respect to supply chains? Well, many businesses, they have hundreds, thousands of suppliers across many different countries, again, depending on the type of business that you're in. Again, there are corollaries to this. Again, like I said, we're talking about manufacturing, but there are corollaries to this in every single business, regardless of size. So be looking for the patterns that you can apply to your own situation. We have usually, I would say most of the time, limited visibility beyond that tier 1. Even if you have a really strong program, that fall off, that sort of logarithmic fall off, invisibility is always going to exist. We have different cultural differences in business practices, particularly in an international context. We have changing geopolitical landscapes. Somebody's on a sanction list, tomorrow they're not. One day we're bombing somebody, the next day we're not, right? Like this stuff is moving around all the time. And then we really have limited leverage to those sub-tier suppliers, those tier 1 and those tier 2 suppliers. With a tier 1 supplier, if you're a major customer for them, there's a lot of power that you can use to push around to get the terms you want, to get the visibility you want, to get the audit rights you want. It's hard to really push that, and that's why that visibility falls down so low after that tier 1. It's really hard to push through in many cases onto that second tier and third tier. So I want to talk about ESG. I know that maybe that's out of vogue or whatever, but I think the concerns that ESG, at least in its purest form, we're meant to capture, still exists in various different pockets throughout our organization. When ESG came out, it's not like it was a new thing. It was really kind of wrangling together a bunch of things that were already done from a safety standpoint or from an environmental standpoint or from a community standpoint and all that kind of stuff. So the risks that now have teeth are some of these regulations that, maybe 15, 20 years ago, all of these things didn't exist. So you have the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. We have the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. We have EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, Conflict Minerals and Dodd-Frank, and Modern Slavery Acts. So there is a lot of extra sort of vectors of risk that exist now from a compliance perspective with respect to our supply chains. And what these laws really require are these 5 things: mapping your supply chain, identifying, what kind of human rights or environmental risks might be contained in those supply chains or in the supply chain that you're relying on, implementing some kind of preventative measures that you can show receipts, so to speak, that you're doing a certain sort of level of due diligence to try to comply with these regulations, right? Establish some kind of grievance mechanism and be able to report on any of your due diligence findings. Again, what we've seen is that this is a process, with a lot of risk in it and a lot of disconnected components. A lot of patchwork goes into trying to get this done. And what it ends up leading to is, in many cases, we're not able to dive as deep as we would like. We're really just doing what we can, right? We're just kind of trying to keep our head above water because, again, there's a ton of complexity, there's a ton of relationships, there's a ton of approvals that are necessary and so forth. So 5 years ago, supply chain compliance meant checking some kind of a box. Post-COVID world, post ESG world, today, it really means mapping this entire supply chain, at least from a materiality perspective, or facing some kind of enforcement, or getting caught with your pants down, so to speak, if the tide goes out and there's some kind of disruption in your supply chain. All right. So supply chain is a major sort of area from an ops perspective. Let's talk about tech and infrastructure. This is going to apply to everybody, regardless of your industry. We have to understand the tech stack inside of our organizations. Again, zoom out. What are we doing here? We're talking about Ethicsverse MBA. We're talking about how we can be better business people, be business people first, that then can, look, I don't know what you feel about special teams. I don't know what you feel about kickers. Kickers are they're football players first, and then they're specialized as kickers, right? Or special teams guys. Those are specialized functions within a football team. We need to make sure that we're not showing up as a kicker. We're showing up as a football player first, or as a teammate first. And so this entire course is really all about reinforcing this kind of a posture and giving us the language and giving us the perspective that can make our specialized, skill set even more valuable and more sort of clearly impactful within the organization. So we have to understand these different things. Our life is not just, adhering to regulations, but rather understanding that intersection of these regulations, or the things that we're required to do, or the risks within the operations of the business in the various different departments. So, I remember that Paul Krugman article from 1996 or something where, this famous economist, I think at the New York Times, who said, the internet is nothing more than a souped up fax machine. And like now everything's internet, right? So carry that forward to AI. The tech stack fluency that you need to have is only going to continue to increase. Okay, so even if you're not a techie person, doesn't matter. You're still going to be able to apply your risk lens. So let's kind of talk through a tech stack in a very simplified way. We have infrastructure. So these are like our servers, our cloud, our networks. Okay, this is the technology infrastructure. When you get on Wi-Fi at your office, there's some routers and some stuff like that. I'm not a big tech guy, as you can tell, but we have this sort of infrastructure. Then we have platforms. Platforms are a critical component of your tech stack. So these are your databases, your middleware, your APIs. Applications are the softwares that users interact with. So there's probably dozens of pieces of software that your company utilizes, across all your stakeholders on a day-to-day basis. There might be hundreds in your organization. Data, of course, is the information that's stored and processed through these various different systems. And then finally, security are the protections that exist at all these different layers. The password on your Wi-Fi, the password to get in, the controls that your suppliers have around their platforms that your team is utilizing to make sure your data is secure, and so forth. Okay, great. Thank you, Lachey. Great question. First question, round of applause for Lachey. Thank you very much. Thoughts on lean contracts restricting proper vendor oversight? I think that always comes down to like materiality. Like, do you need to have belt and suspenders for every single vendor? Probably not. There's always kind of a trade-off between like, how big of a spend is it? How critical is this vendor in your broader sort of like value provision, all these different tasks that end up kind of providing value to the market, that your company provides value to the market. And like, what is the odds that you're going to be able to get what you want? I think those are kind of the few things to kind of consider. So if you're buying Salesforce and you're a relatively small company, like if you're Oracle buying Salesforce, you might have a lot more power and get whatever you want. If you're Ethico buying Salesforce, you probably can't push them around too much. Also, given the sort of, quality, so to speak, or the maturity of Salesforce, and the fact that they are, this is just kind of an example, right? Just the fact that they are so widely used by, all these larger organizations that probably have much more kind of regulatory requirements. I can probably be a price taker, so to speak, or a terms taker on that kind of a deal. But I think we just have to kind of think through. It's not a black and white answer, unfortunately. We just have to think through, is this a hill that's worth dying on? And does me not getting this term or me not getting this quote unquote proper oversight actually translate into an actual risk inside of my business should something go wrong? So I hope you love that answer. If you didn't, keep it to yourself, okay? Why compliance needs tech fluency, okay? Just kidding, Lachey. You can let me know if you hated that. Every business process runs on some kind of technology in most cases. I guess a shovel is even technology if you want to get super technical. Data breaches are compliance events, of course. Many times there's reporting requirements on a data breach, depending on your business in your industry. Cloud migration changes risk profile. So as you move things from one cloud to another cloud, there are sometimes added on risks that can be kicked off. AI integrations, API. I guess you can see where I'm going with this. API integrations open up new channels. Like there's in ancient Troy, okay, in ancient Greece, you had a city with like one door into it, right? One big door, and sometimes it takes 10 years to get into that door. With all these APIs, there's all these like little doorways kind of cut into the walls of the city. So that increases a lot of risk from a data flow perspective or a security perspective. Shadow IT is the compliance blind spot. Shadow IT also put underneath that umbrella, shadow AI use. That's kind of a type of shadow IT. So there's all of these different compliance domains. The the technology infrastructure is more complex than it's ever been, and we've opened up many different sort of pathways that can lead to something else, going wrong down the road. So our domains from technology, underneath the sort of umbrella of technology, these are the major domains that compliance should be at least concerned about, at least have an understanding of this architecture or this, layout, and then think about cloud security. What is the data architecture? What are the access controls? And what kind of vendor technology are we leveraging? Listen, you don't have to know ones and zeros or be able to code in binary in order to have a risk conversation with an expert in one of these various different fields. It's about having a conversation, collaborating, talking across the table, adult to adult, to make sure that their expertise on tech or on cloud or on whatever these, infrastructure, whatever, and your expertise on risk mitigation or how the business works can, create some kind of synergy from an enterprise value enhancement perspective. Okay. So don't get overwhelmed with these things. We all speak English, and your job is really to figure out ways to apply this unique skill set that you've built over the years. So let's talk a little bit about data. Data is an asset and it's a liability. And there's this sort of dual nature of information. Okay. So we've talked, in many episodes about data privacy, about this patchwork that exists on the United States side, how there's a little bit more of a sort of, overarching regulation on the EU side. But these are some of the data privacy things that we should at least have on our radar and understand. Of course, this is so basic, right? But these are the things that we need to understand, like, okay, does this apply to my business? If you're a domestic hospital, you're probably more concerned about HIPAA than you are with GDPR, as an example, okay? So what are some of the essentials from a data governance perspective, right? We're kind of stepping past technology as, pieces on the board, and we're stepping now into like the data pieces. So like, what is data classification? What kind of information do we have? Data mapping, where does this data live? Is it living on people's laptops? Is it on their phones? Is it in our secure network? Data retention policies. How long by law are we allowed to keep information? At what point must we purge that information once somebody leaves or whatever? How long do we keep it? Access controls, who can see what? Who has access to see what? Is everything just on a shared drive and everybody can see everything? Or are there considerations in place to, maintain that privacy or control access? And then finally, deletion capabilities. Are we even able to delete things? In some systems, you can't delete stuff. That can be good. That also can be a problem. And odds are somebody's operating that, or somebody is an owner of that system that might not have the expertise in some of these regulations that might be applying to your business, right? Like these data privacy things. So we have to be able to step into those kinds of conversations. If you don't invite me to the party, I'm coming. Okay. You don't invite me to the meeting, I'm coming to the meeting. I had a great podcast the other day, and the guest was talking about, she just was asking to come to every meeting because she wanted to learn about the business and stuff like that. And I asked her, how many meetings do you think you tried to invite yourself to? And she was like, I don't know, over 100. And I was like, how many of those times were you told, no, you can't come? And she said 0. Okay. So like, if there's a meeting you want to go to it. Okay. Bring your chair to the table. Table. Data is simultaneously your company's biggest value, its most valuable asset, and its biggest liability. All right. Amanda. Hey, Amanda. Amanda's been doing some cool stuff. If you don't follow Amanda on LinkedIn, you absolutely should. She put something really cool on that I really want to steal, or at least learn about. Okay. Amanda asked, do most companies struggle with over retention rather than under retention? Curious what others are experiencing. So drop in the chat your answer to this. And this is not because I've just watched a lot of episodes of Hoarders. I think it's always over retention. My wife is a purger. She's fine throwing things out. And I am always like, well, those are all of my memories. Why are you throwing my memories out? Okay, I'm a little bit dramatic on that side. But I think in general, it seems like deleting something is a decision. And I think people are largely, humans are bad decision makers. And so the status quo is always to just kind of keep it longer, especially as the cost of retention has dropped. But I would love to hear replies in the chat. So it's an asset and a liability. And we need to make sure that we have some kind of cursory understanding on the load of that asset potential and the liability that might be creating in the context of the tech stack and so forth. Okay. Now let's talk about AI and emerging tech. Okay, we're still talking about AI. We probably will forever. I guess we're still talking about the internet. And I'm still referencing a freaking article from 1997. So thank you very much. So AI governance, we've had several sessions on this. We had the one and only Reed Blackman, Dr. Reed, as he makes me call him, on to talk about his book, The Ethical Nightmare Challenge, that was written in response to this whole kind of AI governance thing. Okay. So you don't need to know how to code anymore. So now there's been a massive democratization of like tech stuff, right? Like you can just sort of literally go on a walk with your dog and dictate something and build a piece of code or build a build a game or something. Like my son built a video game yesterday using AI. So I'm starting him young around here. But you don't need to know how to code anymore. But what you do need to know, you as a compliance person, what you do need to know is how AI is being used in your organization. We have a risk assessment tool that a lot of people have been leveraging lately to do these AI risk assessments, and they've been getting a great result. Like, how do you litigate or how do you manage or govern something if you don't even know like what those things are? So doing some kind of building some kind of a register of like the AI use cases, which are myriad across the multiple departments in your organization, is at least going to give you some kind of a starting point to know like where might my risks lie. Because a salesperson leveraging AI, they're concerned about quota. They're not concerned about data privacy. Okay, there I said it. So know what decisions AI is making, know which decisions AI is influencing, and try to ensure some kind of human oversight at that high impact decision. During the great AI debate, kudos to Reed. He was our moderator for that. He was not pushing his book. His book was really like a great answer. We've implemented it in our organization. And what it does is it pushes that sort of governance down to the individual decision maker level or the individual AI user level. So listen, you got to do something to manage the risks and you don't want to get sort of caught off guard here. But documenting your AI decision-making process, or at least, like I said, having some kind of a register on how it's being used inside of your organization is going to make you, if nothing else, look a lot better to the board. But it's going to at least give you the peace of mind of knowing like, okay, there's this new emerging risk and I have some kind of, fuzzy view of the shape of this risk because I've done a little bit of diligence to see how this technology is being used across the organization. So here are some questions to ask about any AI system that is being used by stakeholders in your organization. What is the data trained on? This might be a little bit of an old question because most of these tools out here are using kind of large models, large kind of frontier models. But what decisions does it make or influence? How are our users going to be utilizing this technology to drive decisions? Listen, a business is just a bunch of little bets that individuals are making with their time, a bunch of little decisions that are being made that amalgamate up to ultimately some kind of a bottom line, some kind of a stock price, some kind of a cash flow to the investors. So understanding how these decisions are being influenced by AI is something that you at least need to have, some kind of a sketch of. Who's affected by those decisions? Do we test for bias? Is bias a critical component of this? What happens if something goes wrong? Who is accountable if something goes wrong? We could have a whole session on this, question number 6 here. Can we explain the decisions? Whose neck do we choke? Okay. Do we have human override capability? So these are the kinds of things that we need to be asking at least to leaders. If you don't want to leverage a tool or a platform to kind of build out this sort of AI risk assessment, then you need to do it by hand, which is fine. I'm a pen and paper guy myself, but that's going to be coming through having conversations with at least leaders of the various different departments in your organization. I'm going to blow by this. We talked a lot about, this AI regulation. We're going to see how this kind of shakes out. It's probably going to follow how, the path that privacy took, where we kind of have a patchwork, maybe it's at a state level. And then we have these sort of broader things over in the EU. This is going to continue to evolve. And like what we don't want to do is wait for regulation to start doing things. Like we know there's going to be some kind of regulation. Like let's not wait until, there's a regulation requiring seatbelts in the car for us to use our own brains to say, man, if somebody falls out of this car, they're going to get hurt. We should put some kind of a thing to secure them. We can apply our own cognition, our own brain power to like curtailing the risks, even though there might not be a regulation talking about those risks that we need to comply with. So I want to talk a little bit about a case study. I love a great case study. And so this case study is really all about the one and only Boeing 737 MAX. So what is the story with this thing? We've all heard about it. We've all read it. We've all had that trickle of sweat run down our spine when we step onto a plane and we see it's a Boeing as we walk in. Okay, just kidding. Boeing was in a desperate race against Airbus, and Airbus was winning a lot of orders. So they didn't want to like design a brand new plane. They chose instead to re-engineer the 737. Okay. So in the 737, that had some kind of aerodynamic problems. So the fix was these things called MCAs. This was a software system that would automatically push the nose down based on a single sensor input with no redundancy. Okay. So Boeing ended up kind of minimizing the significance of this. And, and they kind of minimized the significance of MCAs to the FAA and to airlines in order to like avoid retraining pilots, right? So the FAA at the same time was sort of increasing this sort of delegation of safety certifications back to these companies themselves, and they did not catch these decisions, right? So this is a classic kind of confluence of a bunch of these factors, market dynamics, everyone kind of solving for their own outcome that ended up kind of compounding into a lot of risk for the business. So 346 people died in a crash, okay? So what we need to kind of be able to take away from this thing is that, like, here's really boiling down what happened with this Boeing situation. And this is not obviously to pick on Boeing. Like, every organization has this kind of stuff happening all the time. This department's trying to solve for their outcome. This department's trying to solve for their outcome. There's a chasm that exists between them. There is otherism that happens. There are, decisions are made in silos. Like, I could have just done the Challenger explosion as well. That's another example of this kind of thing that tends to happen across organizations. Our job is to connect all these different organs, right? Our job is to reduce risk of the organization. Like, the circulatory system is very different than the skin or the liver. All these different organs need to work together, into the body that is your business. But without the circulatory system, that body dies immediately. And that's really the role that we have to play, or that we can play in our organizations. So there was cost pressures to compete with Airbus. They were losing orders. They engineered some kind of a shortcut that was probably brilliant, in isolation. Somebody didn't sort of think down the line or whatever. The FAA delegated self-certification back to, organizations themselves. Pilot training minimized they were minimizing pilot training to like reduce costs. And there were a couple of crashes that had, devastating outcomes. So, like, what is the compliance lesson from this? Well, one is that operational pressure is always the most dangerous compliance risk, because that's when people cut corners. I mean, we all know this, intuitively, but we often don't know the extent to which this is happening at the end of the quarter or, month to month within our business. Self-certification always creates a moral hazard. You remember, that's why in grade school you would trade and grade. That's why they wouldn't let you grade your own tests. Remember that? Okay. Cost optimization and safety are in constant tension. Cost optimization or profitability and compliance are always in some kind of a tension, right? So we have to help the organization balance those things so that something unforeseen doesn't happen, with devastating consequences. And then finally, compliance independence matters most when there is money on the line. So we need to be able to assert ourselves, invite ourselves to the party, pull that chair up from the kiddie table to the grown folks table, where our conversation, where our input is necessary to make sure that that conversation goes in the right way. That's incumbent on us to do it. It's in our, I'm mandating you to do it. How's that? Okay. So if that's not in your job description, I'm telling you that it's written between the lines, maybe in invisible ink. That's what your job is. We have to be able to get into those things and triangulate and sort of aggregate these different pieces of risk in the organization so that we can increase the going concern of our business, make them more anti-fragile, and be able to weather, the inevitable pressures that hit every single business. So the people closest to the risk were under the most pressure to ignore it. This is the Wells Fargo thing. This is the Volkswagen thing. This is all of these big things that wind up in the headlines. They all boil down to this exact same tension. The people closest to the risk are usually the ones that are under the most pressure to ignore it. Very rarely is there the CEO twisting his mustache, laughing, nefariously to delete reports. That's very rarely what happens. So this is why compliance independence is not optional. It's our job to make sure that we have a voice inside of our organization, and that voice is being heard. Another question in the chat here. Let's see. Brandon, thank you for this question. Brandon, does putting those recommendations in writing make them a liability in a possible future court case where the executives are called to testify whether recommendations for safety improvements had been made or subsequently ignored? Well, I'm no lawyer, so I don't know the actual legality of it. So take this with a grain of salt. This is not legal advice. This is not financial advice. I don't know. I just, this is maybe my bright-eyed, bushy-tailed view of the world. But if you're trying to do the right thing, I think that doesn't really come back void. I think, you can spend a lot of mental calories trying to reduce risk should something go to litigation. All the lawyers are falling off in their chair, I'm sure, right now. But I just think Tyson Duva the attorney general or the assistant attorney general is kind of saying the same thing. Like, it's all about good faith efforts. And if we're trying to do the right thing, and, how do you balance this against the axiom of compliance that's like our three commandments: document, document, document? I don't know. This is kind of a hard one. I'd love to hear some feedback in the chat. Sorry, Brandon, for that non-answer by me. Okay, let's talk about Rana Plaza. So you guys may have heard about this, but this was a very famous, again, very dark episode today. There was a factory that was illegally built that collapsed in Bangladesh that killed over 1,000 workers. And what this exposed is how very little many apparel brands knew about their suppliers or their suppliers' suppliers. So this is just a great example of that second tier. A lot of risk might live in that second tier of suppliers. And many times you're kind of flying blind because you're just kind of buying stuff, trying to reduce the price, trying to get your job done. So here's what happened. The building expanded illegally to 8 floors on an unpermitted, unstable foundation. There were 5 garment factories supplying global retailers packed into those upper floors, okay? Cracks appeared in the walls the day before the collapse happened. Workers were told to go back to work, okay? They didn't go back to work on their own. Their leaders were like, yeah, go back to work. This is nothing. We'll paint over these cracks. The building collapsed in seconds on April 24th, 2013, killing 1,134 people. The brand sourcing from this site had never audited the building itself. So again, I'm not saying compliance officers go to Bangladesh and make sure all of your, there's no cracks in the walls of the buildings. That's not what I'm saying. But there is, it's at least, this at least kind of illustrates the type of risks that could exist out in your third parties. Our good friend Gwen had a podcast or has a podcast on human trafficking and the role of slave labor in many different organizations, right? Like, we live in a very international world, and every country doesn't have the same, controls or protections in place. And you might very well be wearing something that has, slave labor as a part of, its production. It's a massive problem. So with this Rana Plaza thing, I think like ethical audits, depending on the size of the vendor, of course, we always, everything I say has like a standing asterisk, like this is all materiality based. Okay. But ethical audits and financial safety audits are not the same thing. That's one. 2, sub-tier subcontracting can hide risks that headquarters never sees. Headquarters is just saying, cool, we saved 20% on our inputs. Phenomenal. Great job. There are other considerations that are not going to, wind up in that sort of bottom line figure. Local pressures to keep productions running can override safety warnings. Of course, you guys all know these kinds of things, but these can, again, uncover, remember when the slave labor thing came out around Nike and what a hit that Nike took to its brand as a result of it. That's something that has then caused a lot of us to put this up on our radar. So again, I'm not saying you need to do site visits for everything, but for certain ones, you may want to, or for certain ones, you want to at least talk to the person who did that site visit. Maybe there's somebody in production or somebody in merchandising or whatever. Talk to them to get some kind of an understanding about what kind of unforeseen or uncovered risks might still, might exist out in the supply chain. Due diligence must reach that second, it must reach the first tier. What we found in the diligence we've done on this new market that Ethico is entering is that in many cases, depending on the size of the business, there are a whole swath of third parties that never even get checked because it's too cumbersome and you got to make bets with your time and so forth. But there's a lot of risk that can live in those. So again, this is not a pitch by any means, but I'm just saying we have tools now available that can help us get a lot deeper, be a lot more effective, uncover a lot more risk without the sort of commensurate incremental effort on a team that probably hasn't grown as the scope of compliance responsibilities have grown over the last 5+ years. So again, it's kind of a metaphor, but everybody saw cracks the day before. No one with the proper power or no one with power to stop production did. So again, this is another common thing. There were reports on Wells Fargo that came out. There were when that Wells Fargo thing happened, there were a bunch of reports of people speaking up. Nobody with power did anything about it. There were reports on the Volkswagen thing. Nobody did anything about it. So this is a common thing. This is not unique to any of these companies. This is unique to human beings that we respond to the most, pressing, the most important, the most urgent, stimulus before the right thing. That's why corners get cut. That's why, that tragic, we're going dark, so I'm just going to keep doing it. Remember that tragic picture of the person who jumped out of the 9/11 building because that room was on fire? There was no good answer for that person. And so they made that kind of a decision. That's a dramatic picture of this human tendency that like we are all dealing with implicitly by having a business that's full of, human stakeholders. Okay, so let's talk about building the technology relationship. Okay, so this is a really critical relationship for us to be building. And if you're not best friends with this person, you should have a lot of best friends, by the way. I think a best friend is a tier. It's a tier of people, okay? It's not a single person. But you should have a lot of best friends. And the technology relationship, it should be one of your strongest because so much risk lives in the technology stack. And again, you don't have, you don't have to understand all of, what every cord gets plugged into and, the code to the server room in order to have an intelligent conversation, an intelligent risk mitigating conversation for the good of the broader organization with that technology leader. Okay. So these are 5 questions I want you to think about asking your chief technology officer. Again, go to lunch, go get a beer, go get a cocktail, go, have a coffee, have lunch twice. Okay. But these are 5 questions that you should be asking your chief technology officer on an ongoing basis, right? 1, what are your biggest technology risks right now? What are the things that listen, everyone's worried about something, okay? Everybody in the organization is stressed. Everybody has a massive to-do list. Everybody is worried about some kind of risk for their job, for their mortgage, for their department, for whatever, okay? So what are the biggest risks that they're worried about right now? Where does our most sensitive data live? These are things that this person is likely thinking about if they're worth their salt or whatever, okay? What AI, ML systems are we deploying? Which ones are we leveraging? How are those things being leveraged? How do we manage third-party software risk? What is that process? You might already know this, but just hearing from them is going to give you some hints on how they look at that process, okay? So like, don't, I had a recent Ethicsverse episode or 2 actually, from people that were expert investigators. And they talked about this thing of kind of playing dumb or asking questions they might know the answer to in an open way, because you just get so much data, you get so much information. So asking this question, what do we do to manage third-party software risk? Even if you kind of know, it's going to give you some hints on how this CTO or how this technology leader views this views this kind of risk. If they talk about it in kind of a flippant way, well, then they're probably not bought into that process. If they talk about it, if they keep kind of going on and on about it, then you kind of know where they stand in terms of like your reliance on them to execute your compliance program. Okay. What keeps you up at night from a security perspective? I guarantee you, CTOs are staying up at night worried about security. It is top of mind for them. It's beat into their head. There's so many constant changes on that front, on the security front. So here's how I want you to try to have this conversation. This is actual homework, okay? So trading, you can grade your own test though on this one, okay? How do you have this conversation? Okay, you don't need to speak code. You don't need to do a bunch of research so that you sound smart. You are smart, okay? You have this job because you are smart. You don't need to be able to speak their language, tech language, okay? So you don't have to speak code. I want you to try to focus on the business impact, not the technical details. You don't need to understand all those technical details to ask them, okay, well, what's the impact? I don't understand all that. What's the impact? To be able to kind of feel through this thing. Your confidence should not come from your knowledge of a particular function inside of your organization. Your confidence should come from your knowledge that you're still standing, you're a survivor, you've always figured out every problem that you've been faced with, and whatever problem is going to come down the pike, you can solve that as well, okay? Just by relying on your sort of base fundamental, skills, right? Your problem solving, your communication, the application of this risk, this toolbox of like risk mitigating frameworks and perspectives that you've accumulated over your career, okay? Ask them in plain language about data flows. If you get an answer, listen, I feel this myself. If you get an answer where you feel like asking a follow-up question is gonna make you look stupid, you got to get a follow-up question asked. So you can say, you know what, I'm not really an expert in this. Can you dumb that down? Can you say that to me like I'm a 3rd grader? Talk to me like I'm 16. Pretend I'm 16. Explain this to me. You have to overcome that kind of insecurity. I mean, am I projecting too much? But you have to be able to overcome that insecurity in order to actually apply this unique skill set that you have, okay? So don't get caught up in the jargon. Also, tech guys, they're not on here. They love throwing acronyms around. Ask them what it means. They don't even know what HTML stands for, okay? API is a good one. They'll always fail that one. Request architecture diagrams. Do they have it? Can they draw it on a napkin? It doesn't need to be something that they produce, but you need to be able to understand, like, how is this data flowing? How does this thing kind of work? And then offer to collaborate on governance frameworks. What you never want to do, this is just my kind of like life philosophy. I don't think imposing things on folks gets you the buy-in that is necessary for this sort of discretionary effort that's required for this whatever imposition to actually work. It doesn't end up happening. So collaborating on governance frameworks or helping, allowing them to help you develop your materiality lens around the actual risks in the business that they know more than you do is a way to get that buy-in. I love this article. I've talked about it probably 100 times on the show. It's called Fair Process on HBR. So if you haven't burned your HBR credit for the month, this is one that you should absolutely read because it's applicable to absolutely everything in the knowledge work economy. So a little collaboration goes a long way. So now I want to kind of talk a little bit about, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to talk about a practical tool to help us map operational risk. So a lot of times we do our risk assessment every single year, and that is maybe at a high level, across all these different parts of the business. I think there's some value in doing a kind of an operational risk assessment. And so in building some kind of an operational, risk heat map, even if it's something that you don't turn in, even if it's something that you're just kind of doing on your notebook or in a spreadsheet, for your own use, it does a lot to help organize your thoughts on where these risks might be and how those risks, how the occurrence of these risks on the risk surface that you're kind of, required to be kind of managing, how those should inform what your next quarter or your next year work plan should be for your program. So map compliance risk across this entire value chain. We've been talking about this today, this whole kind of supply chain, this value chain thing, procurement to production, to distribution, to customer service. Where are those compliance risks? Where are the operational and compliance risks? Where do those live in the context of your business and the market that you're serving, and to, how you're aggregating inputs to kind of turn into value that your organization is providing to the market? Map those out, draw those things out. Now, rate each one of those things by likelihood and impact. This is very basic. But then what this allows you to do is to start kind of identify gaps. And, what's nice about the likelihood and impact is it like forces you to go through the motions of applying that kind of materiality lens that should be across everything, because nothing is freaking black and white, and we don't have unlimited resources, unfortunately. But it helps you to really identify gaps in your current compliance coverage. And then you can start to prioritize, like I was saying before, you can prioritize based on regulatory exposure or business impact exposure. Because again, remember that picture or that kind of fable or whatever of a bunch of blind people touching the elephant, and one guy's describing the leg, and one guy's describing the tail, and one guy's describing the ear, and one guy's describing the trunk, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that is happening to some degree within your organization. At some level, compliance and ethics and these sort of interconnected departments in your organization, we're like the only ones that have that don't need a walking stick, okay? Because we can see so much more, or we at least have the potential to see so much more. So by talking to these other folks and having a better picture of oh, this trunk and this leg and this body and this tail and this ear, oh, that's actually an elephant. It allows us to bring a unique lens, a unique sort of risk mitigating lens to this picture in real time. But we need to be able to kind of piece those various things together. And I think that this operational risk assessment is a way to do that, so that again, you can show up like more of a business person and get that compliment that Ross Ronan shared with us on an Ethicsverse, maybe several months ago, where his CEO said to him, "You know what? I don't even look at you like a compliance person. You just seem like a business person." High praise. Okay, we all want to get that kind of feedback from our leadership, and we want that to be actual. We want that to be because we're showing up like a football player instead of a kicker whose locker is off to the side of the rest of the group. Okay. If you're a kicker, don't shower with your swim trunks on, okay? Be one of the guys, all right? I'm just kidding. Okay, building your operational risk assessment. So these are the things that you should do. Walk the floor. This means literally this, if you can't walk the floor, you should be doing whatever you're able to do. That's kind of a corollary to that, right? How do you, there's a lot of management that comes from walking around. How do you synthesize that in a remote work, reality? Advocate for if you're in a manufacturing or there are other sites, I have a good friend who is a compliance officer for a health system, and she was constantly going to all of these different sites. She was very persuasive. She's a very bold person. I've learned a lot from her, but she would always be advocating for, hey, I want to go and see this hospital. I want to go and see this hospital. And she was able to do it all the time. And so you have to stack the chips you have to stack the deck in your favor. Okay. You have to kind of create the circumstances for success for yourself, because guess what? Nobody cares about you. Okay. So there, I said it. Everybody just cares about themselves. You need to use that, take a page from everybody else's playbook and advocate for yourself. And I think you'll be very surprised with the results. So walk the floor, literally visit operations in as frequently and as much as you can. Have conversations with those people. Interview the operational leaders. This should not be something formal. This should not be something that they clam up with. You are likely smarter than the average bear with respect to investigations or interviews, right? You probably do a bunch of investigations. Lean into those techniques and build the relationship to really understand their world. This is not something with the single light hanging, swinging in the interrogation room with the phone book on the table, okay? This should just be a regular conversation to understand what's the reality for those operational leaders, and then look at any incident or near miss data. This is data that if it's not captured in your case management system, some manufacturing companies or some hospital systems, they put near misses or slips and falls or, safety issues into sort of one system and let other people feed off it. If that's not true for your organization, get some view of that, because there's probably some things that you can do to help. If you have this sort of outward focus of how can I be helpful to my counterparts? How can I be helpful to other leaders? How can I be helpful to the business? The doors are going to open for you and the red carpet's going to roll out, and you're going to start to see, wow, compliance is actually fun. This is actually really cool. This impact that I'm having is really meaningful. And I'm driving home every day, or I'm closing my laptop at my desk feeling like, wow, I'm actually doing something. I'm not just like, swimming to keep my head above water. Look, of course, at your regulatory trends in your industry. Have some kind of a notification. You can build these very easily with AI. I think that's one of the things that Amanda built, as a matter of fact. So Amanda, drop that link to your post, because that thing is freaking awesome. And then map the kind of the technology dependencies in your business. Okay, so let's talk about, we got a couple of minutes left here. Let's talk about beyond the office door. So we need to make sure that we're shifting our mindset appropriately from this sort of old way, this sort of compliance 1.0 kind of legacy compliance way, into the new way that is going to make us be a true, we've been talking about for a decade being a trusted advisor. Okay, let's do something different to actually make that happen. There's more and more people that have earned that title, but that's not something that is given to you. That's something that you earn, okay? There's a lot of life coaches out there, okay? It's very easy to call yourself a life coach, but the ones that actually make an impact are the ones that have earned it because they've had an actual impact on the lives of the people that they're coaching, okay? So before, the old way, compliance stops at the office door. It lives in a bunch of documents. It lives in a bunch of binders and SharePoint sites that nobody visits. If I can't see it from my desk, it's not my responsibility. Talk about building a moat around your silo, okay? What we want to be and what we should be aspiring to be and what we should be pushing down to our team is this kind of a mindset, that compliance covers every single process. We're the circulatory system that touches every organ in the business, okay? Every supplier, every system is touched by us, and we should have some kind of an understanding of those things. And if money flows through it, I need to understand it. It's a very different kind of mindset shift from that old world, compliance that, people got voluntold to get to be a part of. It is wide open. I was on a podcast recently and they asked me, what is the one word for the next decade in compliance? Where do you think our industry is going? And spoiler alert, okay, you should still watch the episode. Spoiler alert, I said it's wide open because I think it is wide open. I think our industry is at a very sort of nascent stage. There's a lot of growing up we can do. And by growing up, I don't mean like more impact that we can be having. This ascension to being a true strategic lever in our organizations is right there for the taking. Guess what? Everybody cares about themselves. The CEO cares about his business. So if you can do something to be more useful and be more helpful and add more, oomph to the business, you are going to feel that. And that's going to be a feedback loop that you're going to create for yourself. So that's where we're trying to go. The best compliance programs don't just monitor the people in the boardroom. They reach the factory floor, to the warehouses, to the data centers, to the salespeople, living across borders, and into the code repository. And we have our finger on the pulse to some degree to understand that, to have that kind of natural respiration of, well, what's going on in these areas? How do these individual risks that these leaders that now I'm best friends with are sharing with me? How does that fit into the broader bird's eye view of our entire business, how we should prioritize our work plan to mitigate more risk and add more enterprise value. All right, we got 1 minute left. So this is this week's exercise. Do something in this list. Visit a warehouse, manufacturing floor, data center or call center. Do something to get out of your office, okay? See the business you're supposed to be protecting. Understand that to a greater degree. Talk to some frontline folks. You're going to be surprised. I guarantee you're going to be surprised at what you hear, and you're going to be surprised at how easy it is to get more compliance and ethics evangelists within your organization. There's a lot of high conscientious people who want to leave the world better that don't wind up in compliance. They live in all these various different functions, and there's a lot of commitment to quality within your organization. So go find your people, go find your tribe within your organization. Ask what compliance looks like from their perspective. That's going to be very insightful. There's probably some small tweaks that you're going to be able to make. There's probably some messaging that you can push out to more people in the organization to help reframe your function and get more people. Again, compliance is a people business. You can't do your job without the engagement of the stakeholders, throughout the business. So you have to, again, stack the deck in your favor to create those circumstances for success. And then I want you to come to session 6 with fresh eyes. And I think what you're going to see is that you're going to find some processes you didn't know existed. You're probably going to find some risks that never appeared on your risk assessment. And you're probably going to find some people that have heard, people who have never heard of or from the compliance team. These are all opportunities for us. These are opportunities for us to make a absolute real difference. All right, so here are your big takeaways. I'm right on time, almost. I'm only 30 or 40 seconds late, which is phenomenal. I got 57 emojis, 5,700 emojis by myself. Thank you very much, okay? So you guys made my day. I love it. So your key takeaways are that most businesses' risk live in the operations, in the supply chain, in the technology, right? Where those boots are on the ground, that's where the battle's actually being fought. It's not being fought in the command tent, okay? So supply chain visibility drops exponentially after tier 1. In many cases, depending on how you are kind of tiering your vendors in general, people also tier their tier 1 vendors based on risk. Many times it drops exponentially beyond tier 2, your second sort of risk tier of those people that you have direct relationships with. That's where the biggest risk hides. So you have to figure out a way to at least assess whether there's an unforeseen risk living there. And then finally, compliance does not stop at the office door. If your program only covers the people in suits, if it only covers the office, if it only covers leadership, it's not making its way down to those stakeholders who are, living in the foxhole, pushing the battlefront forward every single day. Guess what? That's not a problem. That's an opportunity for you to broaden your impact. Remember, the future is wide open. It's on you to make your, set your plate, make your world your own, make your program your own, and start solving for outcomes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this session. I sure did. We're going to see you back here next Thursday. Next Tuesday, there's no session. The next Ethicsverse MBA session is going to be session 6. That's going to bring all this stuff together. And we're really going to be talking a lot about influence and persuasion and all those kinds of things so that you can run your business like you own it. All right. So we'll see you back here next Thursday with the one and only Hema Lomax. We got a phenomenal episode next Thursday. So yeah, love you all. Take care.